Everyone, I'm Victoria. Today we're going to be hearing from Sir Geoffrey Nice QC. We've got Professor Heather Draper and Suzy Hughes. We also have Hamid Sabi, who he won't be speaking, but he'll be able to answer any questions, and he is the counsel to the tribunal. First of all, we're going to hear from Suzy Hughes, who is the Executive Director and co-founder for ETAC, the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. So off you go, Suzy.
Thank you, Victoria. The China Tribunal has been initiated by the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, ETAC, an international not-for-profit organisation with headquarters in Australia and national committees in the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. ETAC is a coalition of lawyers, academics, ethicists, medical professionals, researchers and human rights advocates dedicated to ending forced organ harvesting in China. ETAC felt compelled to establish the tribunal, given the many reports, some from very eminent bodies, that have dealt with forced organ harvesting, but that have not dealt specifically with whether China's transplant practices have amounted to or included commission of international criminal offences. Under the chairmanship of Sir Geoffrey Nice, the China Tribunal will engage in a rigorous examination of existing evidence of systematic, widespread forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in the People's Republic of China. Specifically, the Tribunal's mandate is to consider the evidence regarding forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China and determine whether international crimes have been and continue to be committed. Prior to 2000, there were few transplants in China, with numbers gradually increasing following advances in immunotherapy. During this period, organs were sourced solely from capital offence prisoners during or following judicial executions, although this was not officially admitted until 2006. From 2000, there was a rapid increase in the number of transplants. The evidence demonstrating this will be presented throughout the course of the tribunal hearings. The source of the organs underpinning this high level of activity has never been explained in a credible way by the Chinese government. Claims that organs came from prisoners found guilty in the criminal justice system and sentenced to death do not add up. Of great concern, the increase in transplant activity coincided with the repression of practitioners of the Buddhist school Qigong practice of Falun Gong. During the 2000s, analysis of various sources of emerging evidence led to the conclusion that people who practiced Falun Gong were being killed to provide the organs, fueling China's transplant boom. Broadly speaking, evidence of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience includes the coincidence of persecution campaigns with expansion of the organ transplantation sector, evidence of medical testing that includes organ scanning of Chinese prisoners of conscience, primarily Falun Gong practitioners in custody, but also more recently of the Uyghur people, a Turkic ethnic minority group who are also incarcerated in very large numbers in China. Evidence from whistleblowers, the mass incarceration and permanent disappearances of members' victim communities, telephone evidence of organ sourcing from hospitals where Falun Gong donors were specifically offered, dual careers of prominent Chinese citizens in the persecution of prisoners of conscience, and organ transplantation. It is this evidence that the tribunal will examine in order to determine whether international crimes have been and continue to be committed. It is common for Chinese transplant professionals to parrot the Communist Party line, saying that those who have been speaking out about the very real and apparent treatment of prisoners of conscience in China, or those who raise awareness of the investigations that have already taken place on forced organ harvesting, have a political agenda. This has resulted in a testimonial injustice that has denied the prisoners of conscience who have escaped the persecution their voice and allowed the crimes that we believe are happening to continue. Whilst ETAC initiated the tribunal, there is a necessary and scrupulous separation between ETAC and the tribunal. For example, ETAC has worked on the logistics for setting up these hearings over the next 3 days, but it is not and will not be privy to the tribunal's internal deliberations and consideration of the evidence, save to the extent that those deliberations are revealed to the revealed in the tribunal's final public decision. Sir Geoffrey Nice will explain more regarding the tribunal processes. During these hearings, 30 witnesses, fact witnesses, investigators and expert witnesses who have submitted evidence will be questioned to assist the tribunal to reach its conclusions in a transparent and evidence-based way. A comprehensive public record of all evidence relied on by the tribunal will thus be created. The findings of the tribunal will be of interest to many, including policymakers, medical, legal, academic and governmental, medical and non-medical transplant professionals, and universities outside of China who may be collaborating with China or considering a collaboration in relation to organ transplantation. ETAC also hopes to add impetus to these issues being considered at institutions including the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. And finally, ETAC also aims to bring recognition, solace and hope to victims, including the bereaved of those killed for their organs and members of the victimised and targeted groups, to signal that their suffering is not being ignored by the international community, that their demands for accountability are just, that in principle they deserve restorative justice, and that there is a hope for the end to forced organ harvesting in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzy. We'll now hear from Professor Heather Draper, who is an expert in bioethics and organ transplant ethics, and is also a member of ETAC's International Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Victoria. So, as Victoria said, my name is Heather Draper. I'm Professor of Bioethics at the University of Warwick, which is here in the UK. One of my academic research interests is the ethics of transplantation and donation, and I've published widely in this area, and I've sat on national bodies in the UK looking at the ethics of transplantation. I'm also I'm proud to be a member of the International Advisory Committee for ETAC. I'll now explain why I think the findings of this tribunal must be taken seriously by all those involved in transplantation, so that is professionals, ethicists and potential recipients. I will start by explaining why ethics has played such a prominent role in transplantation before turning to forced organ harvesting in China. In most cultures, there are rituals that surround the treatment of the bodies of the dead. These rituals may vary, but a deliberate departure from them may be a mark of disrespect and the cause of great distress to the bereaved. The mutilation or violation of human remains, in contradiction to these norms, their desecration, in other words, has long been used as a form of punishment to signal complete and utter contempt for the person or persons now dead. Transplantation using deceased donors has trodden a delicate path through these rituals to avoid these negative connotations. The transplant community has been acutely aware of the need for its practices to include demonstrable respect for dead donors and those who mourn them. Gaining the consent of donors whilst alive and or securing the agreement of those closest to them after they have died is a key indicator of this respect, as is the dead donor rule. This rule stipulates that potential deceased donors must be dead before their organs are removed. It is this rule that bolsters the trust that the process of organ retrieval will not be the cause of our deaths or those of our loved ones if we agree to organ donation. Strict adherence to the highest ethical standards of transplant practice has helped communities to accept deceased donation as a post-mortem practice that can honour rather than defile the dead. In its preamble, the Declaration of Istanbul on Organ Trafficking and Transplant Tourism reminds us that countless acts of generosity by organ donors and their families have made transplantation not only a life-saving therapy, but a shining symbol of human solidarity. Generosity is only possible where goods are given and not forcibly removed. Transplantation can only be a shining example of human solidarity where donors, or their families if the donors are already dead, decide for themselves whether, why and what to donate. The acute shortage of organs for transplantation continues to put pressure on transplant services. But as the Declaration of Istanbul insists, a positive outcome for a recipient can never justify harm to a live donor. The greatest harm that can be done to a potential living donor is that they are killed for their organs. Doctors have a universally recognised obligation not to deliberately and intentionally harm their patients. Performing unnecessary surgery on a healthy person, knowing it will inevitably result in their death, is both murder and contrary to medical ethics. It should attract criminal sanctions and professional condemnation. Transplant surgeons and potential recipients alike can become complicit when they turn a blind eye to the origins of the resulting organs, thereby fueling the market for them and putting more lives in peril. Organ transplantation depends on a relationship between clinical professionals and the communities they serve that is grounded in their trustworthiness as professionals. This is not a relationship that can be taken for granted. Ethical violations, even when these are only perpetrated by a minority, can rupture this relationship. The detrimental impact on donation rates can last for years, resulting in premature and unnecessary deaths of patients waiting for a transplant. This tribunal is charged dispassionately to decide whether criminal offences contrary to international law have been committed in China's transplant practices. It is an independent process, with tribunal members recognised on the international stage to be of the highest integrity and headed by Sir Geoffrey, who has great human rights expertise. It is therefore an important process for all members of the international transplant community. Many have refused thus far to engage with the evidence of grossly unethical practice in China that has been prepared by ETAC and others, and has been just outlined by Suzy. Yet it is impossible for bioethicists, practitioners and recipients to defend transplantation as a practice whilst ignoring this evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And we now will hear from Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, who is the chair of the tribunal.
And as chair of the tribunal of a total of 7 sitting members, I can, of course, at this stage say absolutely nothing about the evidence or about what may be the outcome of the tribunal's work, because the tribunal's premised on the presumption of innocence and will only make its decisions on the basis of evidence presented to it, largely by the coalition, to some extent by others, and evidence that may come to the tribunal in other ways. I'll return to that briefly after 2 other observations. Why do informal tribunals or people's tribunals of this kind do what they do? There's a family of such tribunals, and in each case they seek to fill, and it may be judged do fill, a gap left because official organizations, national, international, will not deal with certain alleged terrible events for probably political reasons. So historically, if you look at, for example, the Vietnam War, there was no investigation into the Vietnam War except by something called the Russell Tribunal, set up by Lord Russell, and the only evidence-based investigation of the entire Vietnam War of that kind. There have been other such tribunals, the Japanese Comfort Women Tribunal, as it's known in short form, the Iran Tribunal, dealing with the atrocities committed against opposition by the Ayatollahs in the late 1980s, the Indonesian Tribunal dealing with the extraordinary massacre in 1965 of opposition members. In each case, these tribunals have filled a gap that the public would want answered and that the tribunal concerned answers in whatever way it does. So that's what these tribunals are. Their value can be twofold, depending on what conclusions they reach. First, as I've just explained for Vietnam, they may constitute in due course the only evidence-based record of some particularly significant event. Second, they may, depending on what they say, of course, be of use to those who seek to have such tribunals established in applying pressure on national or international bodies to do more than they have thus far in dealing with the alleged atrocities or other similar events. So that's what informal tribunals are. We were asked, or rather the decision was made in this case by the coalition, that a single question had not been answered and needed to be answered in the general public interest, namely whether criminal offences, international law criminal offences, are shown to have been committed by the transplanting practices in the People's Republic of China. And it is that narrow question that the tribunal will be dealing with. My last point is about evidence. I said that the evidence that we will deal with has largely been provided by the coalition. Our tribunal is not going to operate in an adversarial way, that is to say, in the format that many of you will be familiar with in America, England, Australia, and so on, where you have two different sides arguing a case. For several reasons. One, it may not be the best way of discovering the truth of an issue. Two, China is unlikely to take part at all in these proceedings. We don't yet know for sure, but it's unlikely. And three, it was decided that by far the best method for this tribunal to adopt is for the coalition to present evidence, which is the evidence that you're largely provided by the coalition, which will be heard over the next 3 days, plus written material that's already been provided and is identified on the website so that you can see what written material is incoming. And then for the tribunal to decide itself whether there is additional evidence that it might want to hear. And if it does, then it will seek the evidence or perhaps get the coalition to try and get the evidence for it. So we are not an adversarial system. We're not entirely an inquisitorial system for those who understand the term inquisitorial system as applied to judicial process. We're something of a hybrid. But we think that, or it has been thought that, this is the best way of getting the best answer for this very important question asked of us by the coalition.
Thank you very much, Sir Geoffrey. Now we're going to open for questions. I'll come down as I want to make sure it gets recorded if you're answering asking any questions. So, one moment.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Richard Hurley from the BMJ, and did you say that there were 7 people going to be sitting on the tribunal panel? How were they selected, and who are they?
First, the decision was made that it would not be best to have people already knowledgeable of or committed to concerns about this particular problem. Second, it was decided not just to have lawyers sitting on the panel, but to compose a panel of people from different walks of life who would have different skills and expertise to bring to the process of deliberation, but not any particular skill. The result of that approach was that several people gave names, including me, I gave some names, to the coalition, and they then decided who to approach, and as a result of who they approached, the panel of 7 was formed. In each case, of course, everyone is working pro bono publico. There's no question of any remuneration for any of the people. This is all done on that basis. And in the event, the composition of the panel is by occupation as follows. 4 are lawyers, with some background in human rights work, from 4 different countries around the world, thus from 4 different judicial jurisdictions. 1 is a retired transplant surgeon, 1 is a businessman, and 1 is a historian with special knowledge of China. Those skills, it was thought by the coalition, in a way it's for them to answer as well as me, were thought appropriate for the tribunal, and we will get on with our work as equals, nobody leading the other, And on the question of law, we lawyers will not decide what the law is. We will receive expert advice, again, from around the world, so that it's not coming from one particular jurisdiction. And we'll get opinion from around the world as to what the law applicable to the facts we find is, and that will enable us to reach a conclusion. To some extent, we are not unlike an ordinary jury in a jury process, for those of you familiar with jury trials.
Just a quick question. What can we expect over the next 3 days?
Oh, Hamid, perhaps, yes.
I didn't hear the question.
What can we expect for the next 3 days?
In the next 3 days, we will be presenting 30 witnesses. 12 of them would be in person here. The remainder would come through internet. The witnesses are divided into witnesses of fact, those who had been incarcerated and had direct knowledge of or had heard about the forced organ harvesting, and some are investigators and experts, those who had investigated this matter for a long time and had published their work or had first-hand knowledge of those investigations. This will be the 3 days trial, 30 witnesses.
Would you like to, can I just add to that? Perhaps we also invited other people to be involved who haven't responded that they will at the moment, possibly in the future. So we've invited the number of past presidents and current president of the Transplantation Society, and Hamid has also issued invitations to Chinese transplant.
We have issued, first of all, an invitation to the Chinese ambassador in London, asking him and his government to be represented here, and offered to provide all the facilities and the time that the Chinese government can conduct its what we call defense or response to these allegations. No acknowledgement had been made by the Chinese government. I have sent further reminders, and for which I have received no answer. I also invited the prominent transplantation surgeons from China. Emails and postal invitations were sent to them. These are the head of the hospitals, those who have carried substantial transplantation activities, and I have very direct and first-hand knowledge of this event and asked them to participate. Again, no acknowledgement received from them. As far as the past and current president of the Transplantation Society is concerned, we have received 3 of them responding that they would not be able to attend. The tribunal had offered them the possibility of submitting their statement to the tribunal at any time of their convenience, but no later than the time that the tribunal wants to issue their report. So no response to that has been received either.
And perhaps I can just add that within the overall plan, really, of this being a democratized process whereby the public not only drive the process through the original work of the originating work of the coalition, but they can contribute in other ways. And Mr. Sabi has arranged on the website, by way of a call for evidence, that if individuals think that something has been missed out of importance, they can contribute and make suggestions as to what other evidence we should consider. And that's very important where there is no adversary, or probably no adversary, throughout these proceedings, because we need to know and we need to consider, and we will do our very best to ensure we do consider, evidence adverse either to particular witnesses who give evidence or generally who take a different view from that which may be being taken by the coalition. So this is an open process where we hope there can be no significant evidence that is missed, or no significant witness who is not given an opportunity to contribute.
Hi, I'm from Epoch Times. Yeah. I think our media group is the first media group started to publish the organ harvesting in China since the year 2006. Think about how many years passed. It's really a long way. So to me, it's very, very happy to see what's happening today here. So I would like to say thanks for everyone who involved with this to establish this tribunal. My question to the tribunal is, why this matter takes such a long time to me come to this stage? Because from time to time I'm puzzled. If things happen like this in Africa or some other small country, maybe already professional people serious to investigate. But things happened in China, it seems always difficult. So that's my question. What's the most difficult for you to really come to this kind of stage to decide to take some action?
I guess there's could be a range of answers to that. It's a very difficult issue to study. It's a very complex issue. And by the amount of reading that the tribunal has already received, is quite extensive documentation. So, I guess one answer to that is that it's not appealing to some, it's not of interest to some to delve into that amount of evidence and that amount of material to actually get a deep understanding of what is happening and be able to position oneself on I guess whether you believe it's happening or not. Obviously, there's issues with collaborations with China, possibly the benefits of that. I mean, I don't feel that I will comment any more on that, but we've got situations there where there's a lot of collaboration happening with China in transplantation, universities, economically. So I think there's a range of reasons. Thankfully, when we first spoke with Sir Geoffrey Nice, he was interested in the issue, and I presume looked to see, whether he wanted to take this on, and he has. So we're just really thankful that these people are giving their time.
Any more questions from anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, one question to the tribunal. Just regarding the issue of organ harvesting itself, as far as I understand, the evidence so far from independent investigations and organizations relating to this organ harvesting also cover a wide range and also shows a change of the features of the background of this issue happening in China. Like it happened even in 70s, 80s. There evidence also it happened to in 90s, especially Falun Gong, as mentioned, that background. And also there is new evidence about the Uyghur people recently. So there is a changing of the background of this issue. So I'm wondering, the research about the hearing about this is mainly focused on particular period of the whole feature of this, because in terms of liability by the regime about this, I just think different. Maybe like if for Falun Gong there is genocide crime, so that is that issue. Just say the legal consideration about the organ harvesting in different time. Maybe the background, the legislation framework should be different or not. I just curious about this. So you're focused on the whole process or a particular period? Thank you.
The material that's been offered to the tribunal at this point starts pre-2000 and comes right up to the present. So that's in regards to the legal questions, which is I think what you're asking. Sir Geoffrey, would you like to comment on what the legal questions are at this point, or how that works?
No, I don't think so.
No, not yet. Yeah.
We do have evidence of course, Uyghurs being used for forced organ harvesting. The evidence that is now before the tribunal covers the period largely from 2000 up to now. We have the latest evidence is 2017 and ongoing problems with this, and the fact that it had continued. I think the last piece of evidence even refers to the continuation even up to November this year. So it covers the period from 2000 up to now, but it doesn't go behind that for 1990s, where there were also that practice going on, but on a different scale and different kind.
It seems like there's no more questions. No? So in that case, we'll close the press conference for now. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you'll be joining for some of the hearings. It starts midday. It'll be in here. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Thank you.